Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Just want to let you know that I just got home. I spent a month in Russia. I traveled in Moscow and St. Petersburg and a couple of small cities near St. Petersburg, including Vyborg, Peterhof, and Pushkin. And I loved it. I'm thinking of moving there. It's one of the reasons why I moved there. For those of you who may or may not know, I am Slavic. I do speak Russian. It's very important if you want to travel to Russia because there are very few people who speak English. But I just wanted to give you some of my observations that I saw, that I collected in my travels in Russia. And it's quite easy to get into that country. They want Americans there. It's easy to get a visa as an American. They have a special 3-year visa, 6-month entry at a time, expires in 3 years. And that's just for tourism. It's a very good visa. And it's just for Americans. Nobody else gets that visa. And I had to take Turkish Airlines into Istanbul because there are no more direct flights because of the sanctions coming from the West. And the sanctions are really annoying because they are sanctions against me. I'm an American citizen and my own government is sanctioning me. I have a constitutional right to travel, but the American federal government does not respect that right. And they're trying to prevent me from traveling to the places that I want to travel to because they have bullshit political agendas that make no sense and are completely untrue and have no foundation in reality whatsoever. Russia's a beautiful country full of beautiful, kind, warm-hearted people. That's what I noticed, is that the people are more polite than Americans. They're more warm and friendly, and they're more real, and generally they're more intelligent. You can have a conversation with the average Russian about anything, cultural, political, spiritual and religious, historical, and the average Russian can have a conversation like this with you. Obviously, the average American cannot. In America, you are stuck to talking about television shows and sports, and you'll be extremely lucky if you can have a real conversation about politics or culture or history with an American, because most Americans just don't understand these topics. They don't care about them, they don't learn about them, and that was a major difference that I noticed, is that the average Russian is much more intelligent than the average American. Also, they do have more freedom of speech than we do. It's a complete lie that Russians have no freedom of speech, that they get taken away by the police if they talk about the war or if they use the word war. In fact, with my tour guides, who are professional women, I met a couple of tour guides, including my travel agent, who personally gave me a tour of St. Petersburg. They started conversations with me in the streets, in public, in the open, about the war, about the government. They criticized their own government. They used the word war over and over again, and how they're generally not in favor of it, and how sad and how much of a shame it is. And they were having these conversations with me in front of police and in front of military patrols. And yes, the police and the military patrols stopped and listened for a minute to us, and then they would just smile or laugh and walk on. So anything where, I saw a video where someone got taken away by a police officer after they used the word war, those are staged events that didn't happen. Prove to me that happened, because I can tell you that it doesn't happen. And you can talk about whatever you want, and people do. People openly discuss any political issues they want. I was listening to conversations in Red Square, right next to the Kremlin, in the heart of the seat of government of Russia, of people talking shit about the Russian government. And nobody cared. There's soldiers and police everywhere listening to everyone. Nobody cared. So this idea of Russians have no freedom of speech and they censor everything, it's complete nonsense. You can also turn on Russian television and get any kind of news that you want. Right on cable, there are like 3 anti-Russian news organizations right on Russian cable TV who just spread bullshit about, the government. They talk shit about Putin. They say all sorts of anti-Russian shit. We'll talk about how bad Russia is and all that stuff right on Russian cable TV. And it doesn't get censored. So This idea that Russia censors things is nonsense. You can go online, you can go onto any website, get any news you want, turn on cable TV, watch all this alternative news, and there's no problem. So just don't believe anything that Americans or Westerners tell you, especially Europeans. They seem to be even more anti-Russian than Americans. Just don't, honestly, my advice is do not listen to Americans and Europeans when they talk about Russia, because they don't know what they're saying. Like, I've studied Russian history and culture for about 20 years. My family's from Ukraine, for those who don't know, and I speak the language, I speak Russian, and I've had an interest in living in Russia for about 15 years. I've been thinking about moving there for a very long time, and about 3 years ago I started making choices and doing things in my life that would lead me toward living there. And I finally visited for the first time the end of April, the beginning of May. I just spent a month there. And I like it. It's extremely similar to the United States. In fact, I would say Russia and the United States are the two most similar countries in the world. Russia and the United States have more in common than England and the United States. I'm not even kidding. We share a soul, our people. We see the world similarly, and we feel similarly about things. You know, you have Americans who are very independent and free-thinking. Of course, these are the good kind of Americans. There are, of course, many Americans who are utterly brainwashed and utterly lost, and we know all about them. But I'm sure you know, if you're watching this channel, you know of many independent-minded, free-willed Americans who want the best for their country and culture. And they see the world in a optimistic kind of a way, or a realistic kind of a way. And Russians are exactly the same. They see things the way they are, and they're a no bullshit kind of people. And a lot of Westerners think like, oh, Russians aren't polite. No, they're very, very polite. It's just they don't waste time with bullshit. Like, they're going to tell you how they feel, and they're not going to lie. They're not going to fake politeness like Westerners and Americans do. Like, we put on fake smiles and fake laughs and fake everything just to be polite, just to, go along to get along kind of a thing. In Russia, there's no go along to get along. People don't fake emotions. They don't wear as many masks as Westerners do. And they're a lot more self-aware and introspective than Westerners. Westerners tend to be extroverted. Russians tend to be introverted. And they're a lot quieter because of this. In St. Petersburg, I was sleeping with the windows open because the weather was nice and the central heating was still on, even though it was like May when I was there. So I was sleeping with the windows open right in the center. My hotel was in the very, very center of St. Petersburg. And the first few nights, I thought, like, is there a curfew? Is there nobody outside? What is going on? It's dead silent. But no, there are millions of people walking around, enjoying the nightlife, doing their thing. I've spent a few nights out, like, until 2 in the morning or whatever, just to see what it was like. And yeah, there's millions of people going about their business, enjoying the clubs and doing whatever, hanging out with their friends and stuff, working late, whatever they're doing. And they're just quiet. They're just quiet people. They speak in like indoor voices out on the sidewalk. They're not yelling at each other. They're not doing obnoxious things in the streets like you find in America. Again, I'm not trying to talk shit about America, but I live in New Jersey, and believe me when I tell you, I know what loud people are like. And in Russia, there are no loud people. Occasionally, sure, you'll get an annoying person blasting their music in their apartment complex. You get that shit everywhere, but it's extremely rare. Not like in New York or New Jersey, where it's just loud all the time and you're just surrounded by inconsiderate, obnoxious people constantly. Also, I think my entire month I was there, I saw maybe 5 homeless people, which was remarkable because I went to bad neighborhoods looking for homeless people and just couldn't really even find them. And even the homeless people that you find are extremely courteous and polite, and they're kind of like ashamed to be begging and things like that. And if you give them money, they're very, very happy about it. They thank you. They're grateful for what you give them. Sure, a lot of them are just going to turn it into alcohol, and that's a huge problem, but they're at least somewhat courteous. The alcoholics are a little rough around the edges in Russia. There's a huge problem with alcoholism. And A lot of it is caused by like Western jealousy. They see Westerners with big screen TVs and sports cars, and Russians just generally don't make enough money to be consumeristic. And some of them just want to be consumeristic, and then they can't. You'll never get paid enough to be consumeristic in Russia. Like, yeah, you can buy a nice camera and a PlayStation and a good TV, and like that's about it. You're never gonna like be able to buy a new TV every year like you can in the United States. You're not going to buy a new iPhone every year. You're not going to buy 10 pairs of shoes. Like you're not going to get that in Russia. Your salary will never cover that. And so people get sad about it because they're jealous of consumeristic Westerners, and they start drinking. That's a huge issue. That's one of the main reasons why Russians drink so much, is because they think that their lives are just not as good as Westerners. If you're into money and consumerism, then yeah, don't move to Russia. Stay in the West, where you can buy your iPhones and television sets and stuff like that. Buy new pairs of clothes every week if you want. That's a Western thing. You're not gonna make enough money to maintain that type of lifestyle in Russia. Russia is for a simpler lifestyle, which is what I want. I mean, these guitars behind me, most of them were gifts. I bought one of them. I'm not a consumerist. I live a very simple life in a very tiny home. And American culture forces me to be different. American culture says I have to buy more, I have to spend more. Even this place is becoming increasingly expensive. Taxes are going up because people are moving out of New York City and into New Jersey, because New York City is just a shithole and nobody wants to live there. It's a crime-ridden hellhole. And so they're all moving into New Jersey, driving up our prices, and I'm getting pushed out of my own home because of these assholes from New York City moving in. And they're just gentrifying the whole place. And I'm being forced to spend more money on things that I don't need, simply because New Yorkers want to live here, because New Jersey is a lot nicer than New York City. But in Russia, every city is pretty nice. I mean, of course you have tons of shitholes. They have hundreds and hundreds of cities because their country is so big. And they don't really do suburbs in Russia. So you either live in a city or you live in the countryside. And so most people choose to live in cities just because it's easier. You don't need a car. You can make more money. Cost of living is basically the same. And there's just more stuff to do. So you have lots and lots and lots of cities of various sizes in Russia. And of course you have plenty of them are absolute shitholes. But plenty of them are extremely nice and clean and have new infrastructure, and they're very, very safe. And I felt safe in every place I went, unlike in the United States, where I rarely feel safe except in small towns. If I'm in a city in the US, I'm constantly on edge. But in Russia, that edge disappeared. I felt comfortable. I never feel comfortable in cities, especially major cities. I never feel comfortable in cities, but in Russia, I felt perfectly comfortable. Like I could live in a city in this country because it's orderly, it's safe, it's clean, the infrastructure is constantly being updated. And if something falls apart in Russia, they start to fix it immediately. And that's something that I noticed, is that there's a lot of renovation going on throughout all of Russia. There are buildings being rebuilt, new infrastructure being put in, and it's just being renovated. Because, of course, 30 years ago, their society collapsed. The Soviet Union collapsed. Their whole civilization shat the bed. And they've been building a new civilization for the last 30 years, which is why they've had the same president for nearly that long. Because why change leadership? You're in a desperate situation where you have to build a brand new civilization. You don't change leadership. So that's another thing that Westerners need to understand, is that Westerners complain, oh, they're not a democracy. Oh, they have a dictator. It's like, yeah, so fucking what? They need one because their civilization collapsed 30 years ago, and they're literally building a brand new civilization that has never existed before. And while you're building a civilization, you need a 5-year plan, a 100-year plan, a 1,000-year plan, because you're developing a new culture and a new civilization, and you want to vote a new president in? Are you stupid? No, you keep your leadership the way it is. And it's extremely important that you don't change leadership, because you need long-term visions, and you need people to stay in office for a long time so they can achieve their visions. If you have your president changing every 4 years, you don't get anything done. Look at our society. You think democracy is better than dictatorship? Who are you fucking kidding? Our society is dog shit. Our government has fallen apart. Our government is a bunch of thieves who just want to steal money from us. They don't care about us. They change every few years. Senators change every few years. Presidents change every few years. And all they care about is making money off the military-industrial complex and the pharmaceutical companies. They don't give a good goddamn about you. They have no vision. But in Russia, income tax is 4%. 4%. They don't force, what we've been forced to get and all of that sort of stuff. They don't do it. And Russians have much more freedom because, like, you can't tell a Russian what to do. This is something that I noticed in their mentality. Like, the government says, like, oh, you can't do this. And a Russian is like, are you sure? Because I think I can. And they're going to do it anyway. And, like, there's a joke that, like, there's a difference between should not and must not. And even if a Russian is told you must not do this, they'll find a way to do it anyway. It's, Всё возможно, если осторожно. Anything is possible as long as you're careful. It's basically like you can do anything you want as long as you don't rock the boat or get caught or whatever. And Russians are a lot more willful. They have a lot more free will and the willingness to exercise that free will than we do. Americans are scared. Even the toughest Texan who talks all anti-government and stuff, like, they don't actually do anything. It's all talk. Talk, 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 talk. That's all Americans do. They never do anything. Whereas in Russia, they just think for themselves. And another way that's possible is because of their anti-propaganda laws. You'll notice there's barely any advertising in Russia. Billboards, signage, all of that stuff. It's almost non-existent in Russia because of their propaganda laws. It's so difficult to create an advertisement. If you create an advertisement, it has to get approved by a government board. And if it's trying to entice people or use psychological tricks to sell something, it's considered propaganda. And that's all advertisement is, psychological tricks and enticements. In Russia, psychological tricks and enticements are classified as propaganda and cannot be used in advertising. Therefore, most people just don't even bother trying to advertise for their businesses, for the pharmaceuticals they're trying to sell, for anything. Like, the advertisements you see will be like, this restaurant sells food. It's like, food is sold here. Like, that's about as much as you can get away with. So when you walk around a Russian city, it's just architecture. Your mind is not being polluted by advertisements and psychological subversion and propaganda and lies and enticements like it is in America. You're constantly being bombarded with messages and subliminal enticements. And you can't think freely if your mind is being polluted and attacked by marketers and propagandists all the time. In Russia, your mind is not being attacked by anyone or anything. You look around and it's just old, nice architecture, clean streets, and that's all you're looking at. Memorials and parks and artwork and art galleries, apartment complexes, businesses with very limited signage. And everything's just clean and nothing is trying to invade your mind. You have an empty, clear mind and you can think whatever thoughts you want to think. You're not being forced to think the thoughts that advertisers and propagandists want you to think, like you do in the West, in America and in Europe, when you're constantly being bombarded and attacked mentally. In Russia, you are never attacked mentally by anything. And so this cultivates a serene inner life, a clear mental life that all Russians are just born with and just have because they don't have to deal with the crap that we deal with on a mental attack level. So you can just go out into public, you can turn off your TV, go out into public and have a clear mind in a huge city center. Try having that in the United States. A clear mind in a city center? Yeah, fucking right. And as soon as you leave a city, you're in the wilderness. Like I said, they don't really do suburbs. So like the city limits will then have an industrial ring around it, and then outside the industrial ring, you are in the forest and the lakes and the mountains, and you are in untouched wilderness as soon as you leave the city limits. And even while you're still in the city, if you look down a really long avenue that's got a clear view to the city limits, you'll just see the forest out there. And that gives you a sense of expansion of mind. And the sky is enormous because there's so much wilderness out there, and a lot of the land is very flat, especially in Western Russia. The land is just very flat. So I don't know if you've ever been to Montana or Wyoming, and the sky is just enormous and big and beautiful. That's what it's like in Russia. It's such a huge sky. You can see forever through the horizon. And this creates an uplifting, expanding effect on your consciousness. And you just have that feeling all the time, this expansive freedom feeling in your mind in Russia all the time. They also don't chemtrail. I had forgotten what a clean sky looked like. Just beautiful blue sky with white fluffy nimbus clouds, like a normal, actual, natural sky. I had forgotten what those had looked like until I had gone to Russia, and it's like, oh wow, those are real clouds, that's a real sky. And then being back here in New Jersey, everything's just this oil slick gray haze 24/7, and then every morning I see the airplanes with their freaking 10-mile long chemtrails of poison billowing out of them to create these fake clouds full of aluminum and barium oxides and whatnot. And they don't chemtrail in Russia. They have beautiful, natural, clear blue skies with white, beautiful, fluffy clouds. And here in America, we just have disgusting two-dimensional oil slick gray clouds. And it's very disappointing, that contrast. The food is healthier in Russia, obviously. They have junk food with preservatives and stuff in it. You can obviously find that stuff at any grocery store, but most of the food in Russia just doesn't have those preservatives and food colorings and all that other shit we put in our food, like soy oils and corn syrup and all this garbage and pharmaceutical waste products and industrial waste products that they put into our food, using our bodies as waste management because they don't want to pay for waste management, so they use them as food additives, and we eat these pharmaceutical industrial waste products, and we just have this poisoned food supply because Americans only care about making money. Well, they don't do any of that in Russia. You can go into any supermarket, any grocery store, which by the way are exactly the same as ours, full shelves, nice, new, clean, tons of food everywhere. And you can just grab anything off the shelf and you are guaranteed that none of it's poisoned. It's just regular old food. And that was such a relief. Like I could go to any grocery store and I could just get the food that I wanted. Some of these yogurts, some of these things here, whatever snacks I wanted. And the ingredients list is like, it's got 8 ingredients on it, no poison, you're done. And that was like the vast majority of their food was just unpoisoned, regular old, normal ass food. And you don't have to worry about it. You can go to any grocery store, worry-free, grab whatever you want off the shelves. You don't even have to, after a while, like I stopped reading the ingredients list because it's like, oh, it's all safe to consume. It's all just regular food. There's no unpronounceable Greek words on these ingredients lists. It's just flour, unpasteurized milk, this, that, the other. It's just food. They sell food in Russia. They don't sell synthetic waste products that they call food like they do here in the United States and in some places in Europe. So that was a huge weight off my mind. There's also no food deserts in Russian cities. You can get healthy, cheap food every block in a Russian city. It's not like in America where sometimes you go entire 10, 12, 15 blocks and all you get is Snickers and Kool-Aid, In Russia, there are no food deserts, and the cities are much more walkable. You don't need a car. The public transportation is amazing. It's just so available. There's like a bus every 35 seconds and a train every 1 minute. It's insane. You can just get anywhere you want. There's so many, electric trains, buses, trolleys, excellent metro system, very well organized and easy to navigate. Their subway system. It's just very, very easy to get around. And you can't get lost in their cities. They have well-designed maps. Where we have advertising, they have maps and navigation points in their cities. And you can just go to any of these big signs on the sidewalk and know exactly where you are and where you're going. It'll tell you all the bus routes, trolley routes, tell you how to get to a metro station. They just have all these really nice maps everywhere. And you just can't get lost, even if you tried. And I tried because I like exploring. So even like in New Jersey here, every couple of weeks I'll try to go somewhere and I'll try to get lost. And it's because it's fun for me. I like exploring. And like I tried to get lost in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and you can't. You just can't. It's like it's too easy to navigate these cities. And another interesting thing that I noticed is just, Russians don't really complain. They like to complain about their own society, the way Americans like to complain about America. And that's funny. And I can relate to them on that. But they don't really complain or freak out the way Americans do. Like something goes wrong in an American's life, or even Europeans are even worse than Americans actually, and they lose their mind. They think like, oh, it's the end of the world. They yell and they get all huffy and, oh, someone cut me off on the road, and they start yelling and getting all angry, or something goes wrong, and they just become very impatient and very emotional very, very quickly. Russians don't. They're way more patient. They're way calmer, more introspective. They don't fly off the handle. They handle everything with a calmness. They can endure a lot more than Westerners. Westerners are like little babies that can't endure any inconvenience. But all of Russian society is quite inconvenient, and it has been for more than 100 years. So they know how to endure inconvenience. They know how to endure hardship and troubling times. And they've become a very patient, strong, resilient people because of it. And you see that, the way that they survived the Soviet era and have come out the other side and are building a brand new civilization. They're very coherent together. They're culturally on the same page. They have a shared vision of a future, and they want to achieve that vision. Of course, the younger people don't really understand this because they were born after the Soviet Union collapsed. And they're like, oh, Russia's so terrible. I can't believe the rest of the world is so much better. Oh my God. It's like, do you not realize your civilization collapsed 30 years ago? Of course it's difficult. What are you talking about? And they compare themselves to the West, who has had no troubles, except maybe in World War II, Europe had some trouble. But beyond that, Western civilization hasn't had any trouble at all for 500 years. And you want to compare your civilization that just collapsed and is rebuilding itself to a civilization that has been living fat and happy without any problems for 500 fucking years? Like, young Russians are kind of clueless regarding that. It's like, have some perspective, for crying out loud. Like, your civilization's doing just fine. It's building itself up. It's like when you look at a graph or like a chart, and generally it's going up, right? But they'll see like these little spikes. And like, so yeah, the spike goes up and down and up and down and up and down. It's generally going up. But if you have a small vision and you only look at one of the jumps, you see it going down. And that's what young Russians are, just see it going down. And they're like, yeah, everything's collapsing. Oh my God, our society only has 10 years left before it collapses. It's like, no, it's the general trend is going up. And they just have such a small perspective of it. And they love to complain about how bad their society is. And their complaints were so silly as an American. They're like, oh, our government is so corrupt and our taxes are too high. I'm like, your taxes are 4% income tax. You're complaining that's too high? In America, the government takes about 50 to 60% of everything I make. 28% right off the bat from income tax, for federal income tax, and then state income tax on top of that, property tax on top of that, sales tax on top of that, fees and things like that for the bureaucratic paperwork that I need to get done for business certifications and things like that. And the government winds up taking like 60% of what I earn, and I'm hearing Russians complain about their 4%. And it's just so funny. It's so funny to me to hear them complain. They just have better laws, better immigration policy. They protect their people. Like, if I wanted to start a farm there, I'd have to start one with a Russian who would be the majority owner of the land and the company. So they don't let foreigners be majority owners in any stakes in Russia, land, companies, anything like that. Russian citizens have to be the majority owners. So they protect their people, they protect their resources, they protect themselves from foreign enemies and from foreign business interests. And so it just goes back to them having a more coherent culture where they're more on the same page about their future and their vision for the future and achieving that goal. My travel agent's kids are in music conservatory. They're between the ages of 7 and 14, and at age 7 you can go to a conservatory for music, for dance, for sculpting, for painting, for any of the arts, and they're free. Well, paid for by taxes. They're like public schools, so free. And Yeah, so at age 7, you can specialize in an art form, and the schools run from 7 to 14, and then you can go to another specialized secondary school, either another conservatory in an art form, or go to a general high school, like a secondary school, or find a vocational school. And it's all paid for by your taxes. And so basically, every Russian is an artist because most children, they will choose to go to one of these conservatories, because why wouldn't you? If you have a choice between going to a music conservatory or a dance conservatory or going to a regular middle school, high school, the kid and the parents are both going to want to choose the artistic conservatory because it's much more fun, it's much more interesting, it's better for your brain, it's better for your soul. So every Russian is essentially an artist because they all go to art school between the ages of 7 and 14. And it's just like, oh my goodness, what a difference that has on the rest of that person's life. From 7 to 14, they study music or dance, and even if they don't stick with it, at the age of 14, maybe they want to become a lawyer or something else, whatever, but they spent 7 years in a conservatory during their formative childhood. I mean, come on, they're better people. I'm sorry to say it, but some cultures are just better than others. I don't know how to break it to you. And I received help from everybody that I asked. I wouldn't want to live in Moscow because it's kind of rat racy. It's the financial capital, it's the political capital, and everybody moves to Moscow because that's where you make the most money, and everybody's in a hurry. The city's huge, the streets are enormous, so you got to run everywhere. You're always going to be late because the streets are so long and big. It's so hard to get anywhere. So everyone's always in a hurry in Moscow, and I wouldn't want to live in that city. I actually got sick of that city after about a week. But St. Petersburg, I never got sick of it. I spent 2 weeks in St. Petersburg, more than 2 weeks, and I never got sick of it. In fact, I kept liking it more and more and more. And when it was time to get onto the train back to Moscow at the end of my stay, I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave St. Petersburg. I wanted to stay there. And I was very, very sad. I was overwhelmed by when the train pulled out of the station. I was just extremely sad that I was leaving and going back to the United States. Because in St. Petersburg, everybody that I stopped and asked for help, for directions, or for something that I needed, everybody had time for me. Everybody. Nobody refused me. Nobody was impatient. Everybody smiled at me when I asked for help, and they all helped. They even offered extra help. Even the soldiers offered to help me. Like even in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, if a soldier thought I was lost, they saw me looking at my map and trying to get bearings, they would go out of their patrol, out of their way to ask me what was wrong, offer me directions to where I was going, and on top of offering me directions in Moscow, I was walking away from a soldier who went out of his way to help me to find a metro station. And I was like 15 feet away, and he shouted after me. And I turned and stopped, and he mentioned a really good dessert and coffee place. If I just went an extra block before making my left, he told me that there was a great place to get sirniki, which are these little cheesecakes, and coffee. And it's like, he didn't have to do that. Imagine an American soldier or police officer who is patrolling the streets, like offering, just out of kindness, where to get good cheesecake and coffee after telling you how to get to the metro station. It's like, that's unheard of in the United States. But in Russia, they're just super nice. They're super friendly people. Very polite, very warm and welcoming people. Everybody who learned that I was American loved it. In fact, at Park Pobedy, Victory Park, I was the first American to do this historical educational program that the museum was putting on, like disassembling and reassembling Russian guns, and learning about a soldier's average mess kit, helping a guy build boots for soldiers, in the 1920s military style, and like all this historical stuff. You would go from station to station, and they applauded when my tour guide told them all that I was American, and about a dozen Russians followed me around the whole park and museum just because they were so interested to be near an American and to be asking me questions, and they were amazed that I could speak their language, and they're disappointed that they don't get many Americans here anymore because of sanctions, and they were so happy that an American was in their country. Every Russian I met loved the fact that I was American. They thought it was so cool. They all love American people, and there are these monuments in Park Pobedy. And One of them is in memorial of the joint Soviet-American campaign that was fought on the Elbe River in World War II against the Nazis, and it's this little plaque that's written in Russian and in English about how great it is that Russians and Americans work together, and were a great alliance, and it was a great friendship. You go further down Park Pobedi, and there's this giant statue of Russian and American troops together, and it's in memorial of the Soviet-American alliance in World War II, and in the 1950s and beyond, and the joint military ventures and the space program that we did. Even despite the Cold War, our politicians are saber rattling at each other, but our militaries are working together. In fact, my grandfather, my step-grandfather, I don't know what to call him, was in the Navy. He was an officer in the Navy, and he ran joint Russian-American or Soviet-American naval programs throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s. I even have a Soviet soldier's hat because they traded hats one day back in like the early 70s. And my other grandfather is a colonel in the Air Force, and he worked in the space program, and he was constantly working with Russians, and back in the 60s and 70s. And yeah, there's a willingness to cooperate in Russia. Russia wants America to be their friends and allies. They have monuments. They have American monuments in honor of American programs, military, etc., all throughout places like Moscow, where they have all these little beautiful monuments and memorials to the United States, and how they cherish the friendship that we've had over the last 100 years, even longer, because during our Civil War in America, when English and European bankers were hiring mercenaries to fight for the South against the North, Tsar Alexander the Second blockaded the eastern ports from like Florida all the way up to Boston with a Russian fleet to prevent mercenaries from reinforcing the South, allowing the North to win the Civil War. And people forget about that Russia and America are best friends. We share a soul. The Russian American people are so similar in so many ways. The longer I stayed in Russia, the more it felt like the US, the more comfortable I felt there. And we have this kindred history and this kindred spirit, and we work together really well. We work together way more than we realize, even despite the Cold War and everything. We were working together, our space program, our military officers, our intelligence agents, our corporate programs and everything. We were working together all the time. The Cold War only existed in the imaginations of senators and in the sales rooms of Northrop Grumman and Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, because they just wanted to sell weapons to NATO. But beyond that, the Cold War literally didn't exist. We were working together with them constantly, and there are so many memorials to this friendship throughout Moscow. And there's a willingness within the Russian spirit to be friends and allies with the United States, and they love the American people. They talk about how much they love us. Every time someone found out I was an American, they would just go out of their way and start gushing about how much they love Americans, how smart and fun and cool and interesting they think we are, how brave and pioneering and things like that. They're like, oh, I love the American mentality. Like, you guys just get things done. You're so innovative. You're so fun. You're so creative. Like, oh my God, I wish we could work together more. Like, it's so much fun to know an American. I used to travel to America, and I loved everybody I met. And it's just, there's this willingness, this beautiful, beautiful spirit of cooperation that exists within the Russian heart toward America specifically. And they want to be our friends and allies, and I think we should be. I think we could accomplish a lot together. If the US and Russia created an alliance together, a real alliance, we'd be unstoppable. We would run the world. Our two countries would create so much peace and plenty and prosperity in this world if our stupid government would just get its senile head out of its ass. I mean, we have all these old senators, these delusional people. Honestly, it just goes back to Operation Paperclip and the types of influences. Because, the Russians beat the Nazis want revenge against the Russians. And you can see it in NATO. NATO's run by Nazis. Ukraine is run by Nazis. Our intelligence agencies in the U.S. are run by Nazis and the children of Nazis. You know about Operation Paperclip. I don't need to get into that. But our military-industrial complex, our intelligence agencies, and NATO are essentially are driven by Nazis as trying to get revenge against Russia because Russia beat the Nazis in World War II. And so you have the children and grandchildren of Nazis who were like, we were supposed to be ruling the world right now, but because of Russia we failed. And so now you just see they're trying to take vengeance against Russia. So all this anti-Russian shit, it really is Nazis, the children and grandchildren of Nazis who spread all this anti-Russian hatred. So don't fall for it, because if you believe the American news media and the American government, you're basically believing Nazis. Like, is that what you want? Your grandparents fought against the Nazis in World War II, and yet here they are running our country. Is that what your grandparents fought for? Is that why we allied with Russia and beat the Nazis in World War II so that we could be brainwashed by them and their children and grandchildren today? Like, don't be stupid. We need to be friends and allies with them. We need to build bridges with them. And I'm an English teacher. I tutor online sometimes, and I'm thinking I might move to Russia as an English teacher and just be a bridge builder. I'm not fully decided yet because I love both countries. Like I said, both countries are so similar that there's a point where it's like, why bother moving if we're both so similar? It's like just moving to a different America. But at the same time, it's like, I like it there. Why not move? It's like, why move? Why not move? So I haven't fully decided yet, but I might want to live in St. Petersburg as an English teacher and just, I saw how the other half lives, and they live just like us. They're just slightly calmer and slightly more introspective and slightly smarter than the average American. But beyond that, we're exactly the same. And we all love each other. Americans love Russians, at least the Americans I know. We all love Russians, and Russians love us. And there's no problem. All the problems are imaginary. Russia's a beautiful, safe, orderly, clean place. There are no problems there. They have their problems like any other country, of course. I'm not saying there are no problems there. Of course they have problems. I just mean the problems that our government and our news media try to get us to believe in are complete fairy tales. They're not real. Like this, they censor people. They have no freedom of speech. All that stuff is lies. Or it's dangerous. They're kidnapping and arresting Americans. Lies. The only Americans that have gotten arrested are douchebag criminals, drug dealers, drug users, wife beaters, like that guy, like that soldier who just got arrested. He was a wife beater. He beat his wife, and he was cheating on her with some Russian girlfriend, and he beat her up and her mother. So this dude beat on 3 women and got arrested in Russia. Yeah, you can keep him, Russia. Put him in one of your hellhole one-way prisons. We don't want him. And like that journalist who got arrested, he was a spy. He's been arrested for what, 4 years now? It's because he's a spy. He's not a journalist. Like that girl who got arrested, she had drugs on her. She had like marijuana and some pharmaceuticals on her, and everyone's complaining, oh, they arrested an innocent American. No, she was a drug user, and she had illegal drugs on her. Like, these are the Americans getting arrested in Russia. Because there are tens of thousands of Americans in Russia. There are Canadian and American families moving to Russia every freaking day because they prefer the culture there. They prefer the stricter laws. It's a safer place. It's a more orderly, safe place. And if you want to raise kids, you raise them in Russia. You want to raise kids in the public schooling system as it is now, you're going to have some psychopathic teacher trying to convince your little boy to cut his penis off because you're actually a girl. Like, you want that bullshit? No, that shit's illegal in Russia. And it's just, some cultures are superior than others. But our souls are so similar. And the problems are not real. The problems that the government and the news media are trying to convince you are real are not. They don't exist. Russia's a perfectly fine country. It's a perfectly fine, normal first world country, just like any other fine, normal first world country. And I loved it there. I miss it already. I've been home for about a week, and sometimes I wake up in the morning and there's a moment where I feel like I'm still in St. Petersburg. It's like a part of my soul is still there. But anyway, just wanted to let you know my observations of Russia. I think it's a fine country full of fine people. and is very, very similar to the United States, another fine country full of fine people, even though I know I talked a lot of shit about the US. I only did so to contrast the major points. But other than everything I said, our countries are exactly the same. Our people share a soul. Russians and Americans share the same soul. And we need to realize that, and we need to come together. And we would be unstoppable. Imagine a Russian-American alliance. We would be unstoppable. This world would be so much better. The future of humanity would be so much better. So, I hope this was a nice video. I hope it brings some relaxation and calmness into you. You don't have to believe anything the news media tells you. Everything's a lot better than the news media would have you think. The world is a lot better and a lot safer than you might think it is. So I hope this brought some tranquility and serenity and loveliness into your lives. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.